So why don't we go ahead and get started? Charlie Hopewell, Howard Ward, and Angela Wilhelms. And audience of 2, 3, 4. Get Sally in here, that makes 5.
Perfect.
Yes, so just,
Almost double.
right, so just go ahead, Charlie, take it away.
I guess you could start the report at this point.
Okay.
So, all right, so anyway, welcome. As I was thinking, by the way, of the panel and so forth, I thought to myself, the key to leadership is hiring people who are much smarter than you are to make you look great. And that's why Howard and Angela are here today. So I just wanted to make that clear. Again, the purpose of today was to really kind of take a look at the breadth of where does manufacturing fit in the economy? What are the opportunities? What are some of the challenges? What are disciplines that we have found in all 3 of our experiences that are dissimilar than disciplines maybe traditionally connected with an MBA education? So we'd like to really start the conversation with Angela Wilhelms, who's President and CEO of Oregon Business and Industry. And Angela, I'll turn it over to you.
Great, thank you. Because I'm doing a data rich portion, I'm gonna use some slides, but I'll just do them from my seat. I was asked to focus a little bit on the sort of state of manufacturing in Oregon, playing into the contribution, challenge, and opportunity theme of today's discussion. So stop me at any time, and I have hard copies here of the report that I will go through, but oh, maybe I can't do it from here, I'm too far away.
Sure, take it over.
There you go. Oh, so from here, more official. Yeah. So first, why does OBI care? OBI is a statewide membership organization. We represent businesses of all sizes in all industries in all 36 counties in Oregon. And we have 3 official hats. We are the statewide Chamber of Commerce, but we're also effectively the State Retail Association. And importantly for today's conversation, we're the state affiliate of the National Association of Manufacturers. So we're the de facto state manufacturing association. So the data I'll share today, and it's available on our website, is from a report issued a couple years ago. We've actually just commissioned Agno Northwest to do a refresh of this report. So we'll have new data in October of this year. But for now, that is where I'm drawing from. So I'd like to attribute everything I'm about to do to that Agno Northwest report and the good team there. Natalie, who's here, will be working on our refresh this year. So that's so just a quick look at the state of manufacturing in Oregon. It is 8% of total jobs in Oregon are in the manufacturing sector, over 200,000 of them. And it's 13% of Oregon's GDP. Why this matters is it means it's one of the most highly productive sectors of our economy because its contribution to GDP as a percentage outpaces its percentage of employment. So it's actually 42% more productive, which is beneficial for the economy and its growth. We rank 16th in manufacturing in the US as a share of state GDP. So we're pretty high up there as far as being a manufacturing state, the state known for that industry. We'll talk more about wages in a bit, but you can see here that manufacturing jobs have a higher median income than all other industries, which leads to that productivity, but also is a great testament to why we want to grow manufacturing, help lift Oregon's economy overall. One thing that we think is important to note, this goes to the opportunities part of this conversation, is Oregon has seen a growth in manufacturing jobs over time, whereas the rest of the United States on average has seen a decline in manufacturing jobs over time. So this is a 50-year measure. And Oregon is well positioned, we believe, if it chooses to take advantage of all the conversations nationally around domestic reshoring, and investing in manufacturing jobs and manufacturing economies. So we have had our peaks and valleys, but overall have done very well in growing manufacturing. Those jobs, however, have shifted, which is probably not a surprise to people. In industry allocation, you can see the brown is wood products. That used to be the largest share of manufacturing, followed by metals another type of sort of industrial advanced manufacturing. Those have shifted over time. Metals and industrial manufacturing remains very high, and a lot of Oregonians don't know this or appreciate this about our economy, but it is a very significant piece of it. But obviously things like high tech and then food and beverage, which are the light blue and dark blue respectively, have crept in there as new second and third tier levels. People talk about sports and apparel a lot in Oregon, that falls into the kind of rose colored all other manufacturing. What's important to remember here is while that's a growing industry cluster in Oregon, it's still very design and creative heavy and not necessarily the manufacturing taking place. And this just shows that chart in a slightly different way, showing how the subsectors have grown or contracted over time. So you can see a massive spike when Intel joined the Oregon family in high tech and electronics, and that sort of steadied out a little bit. But the highest growth of late is actually down here in food and beverage manufacturing, which also, if you're from Oregon, doesn't surprise you, given all the delicious things we make to consume. Also important, sorry, these numbers got squished a little bit, so I will work on fixing that. But what this just illustrates is that in 30 of Oregon 36 counties, manufacturing is a significant measurable presence. And in more than half of those, it represents at least 10% of jobs. So this isn't just a Portland or Multnomah County conversation. It's not even a tri-county conversation. This is really a statewide conversation. So it's important to the coast, the east, the valley, southern Oregon. So just looking at workforce a little bit to unpack that productivity figure. This is some of the best information about the manufacturing industry from our standpoint. You can see that manufacturing covers a lot of different areas, but there's opportunity for growth here. There's opportunity on this slide to increase the number of females participating in manufacturing, to increase the number of young people coming out of high school, hopefully with trade certifications, things like that, to enter that workforce. It does have a higher than other industry percentage of BIPOC employees, and that's really important here in another slide or two. Also, the educational attainment piece is manufacturing is a terrific way for people at all education attainment levels to basically eliminate that educational attainment wage gap that they might see in other industries. So this just unpacks that a little bit more. So you can see it doesn't matter what level of education you receive or complete. If you are in manufacturing, you're going to have higher wages than the other industries on average. So this isn't just about all the PhD engineers in certain fields or things like that. It's up and down the manufacturing workforce. So OBI is interested in state policy, so we wanted to unpack this for policymakers a little bit, and I think this squarely demonstrates the opportunity of manufacturing. We asked through the Echo Northwest report, what would 10% growth in manufacturing for Oregon? Just for context, that's about 4 years of accelerated growth. Manufacturing grows about 2.5% per year. So it would mean 66,000 new jobs, most of those indirect jobs outside of manufacturing, thanks to supply chains, consumers, transportation, logistics, things like that. We'd probably grow the state by 22,000, which some people don't like that, but when you're looking otherwise at population stagnation, that's a pretty important thing for our economic future. And then importantly, it would raise about $9 billion of the GDP and put about half of that into personal income. This bullet, we think, also is important for policymakers to understand, which is that this growth represents about $800 million in annual state and local tax revenue. So at 1.6 on a biannual budget. Like that's real investments. It's 1,000 teachers. You could extrapolate that a whole bunch of different ways, and that is significant money to help pay for some of the critical services in the state. So just to end my part, I'll quickly touch on from our standpoint at OBI what some of the opportunities and challenges are. I won't read all of these, they're fairly widely known throughout the industry, but there's things for people to think about. This is, I think, what makes this really exciting and hopefully a field that people are interested in going into, whether you like international business, whether you like your hands-on really making stuff pieces of manufacturing, whether you like the complexity of financing or logistics. It doesn't matter, you can find those challenges in manufacturing, and we have huge opportunity as a state. Again, if we want to take it. And that gets into the work we do at OBI and some of our challenges. We live and work in a highly regulated state, according to the Cato Institute. We rank 47th out of 50th in the states for regulatory friendliness environment. And so we have to figure out how to allow our businesses to thrive, while of course having appropriate regulations around safety, quality, et cetera. And we are increasingly facing competition from other states. Manufacturing in some ways is harder to lure away because of the capital investment that manufacturing companies make. But over time, as those companies look to grow or expand to new facilities or make significant investments in a facility, the math can easily pencil out for those companies to grow or relocate. And we have to stem that tide from our own economic benefit standpoint. And then we have some specific policy things we have to figure out as a state, frankly, not just for manufacturing, for all industry, but for manufacturing in particular. So these are the challenges that we're working to address. So that's at a high level, the state of manufacturing in Oregon. I know I went through that. Happy to answer any questions later, but I think Howard is next.
Thank you, Angela. So just, I'll introduce myself. My name is Howard Worth. My background is, like Charlie, I've been involved in manufacturing, one form or another, basically my whole career. Currently, I'm with a company that's actually part of the fulfillment veterinarian, so it's a little different path, what I've learned past, but actually, even though it's not a manufacturing organization, it's a distribution commerce. There are a lot of parallels that one can take from manufacturing and adapting to other business or industry segments. In terms of my topics that I'm going to cover, is just what some of the challenges and opportunities are, and also because Angela kind of pointed out what the contribution is. And primarily, this is a focus from my experience in manufacturing and where I've seen opportunities and where, if organizations are successful in these areas, have the ability to be very successful. And one of them is a key element is what's the cultural elements of the organization. So, and when I talk about culture, often it gets overlooked that a lot of people have gone through the strategic plan, the values on the wall and so forth, but it goes beyond that. It's, you know, it goes with how that whole organization works and together. And that means empowering the employees to make decisions and raise issues. And that means that the individual actually assembling something or cutting the piece of material or attaching it to something else has the ability and is empowered in an open environment to make recommendations, changes, provide input to how to improve the process. But also there's an element of continuous learning within the organization. And but through that, it provides that feedback to constantly adapt and provides that creativity to address the challenges. Because with any manufacturing process, there's always day-to-day that goes some different challenge that was addressed. And then finally, the culture needs to understand and respect quality, the importance of quality is. And then if a part gets reworked that's not value added, it doesn't add value to the organization. So being able to have that quality focus and have that ingrained as part of that cultural value is also quite important. Other elements that from my work experience and understanding, which really helps an organization, is understanding the value streams within the organization. I think we're all familiar with an organization that have your HR department, your finance department, your accounting group, your engineering group, purchasing group. But all those functions need to work and essentially in a horizontal fashion to create the value to what is being manufactured. And I can give some examples of that. Years ago, I used to work for a company that manufactured rail cars, and the purchasing department went out and got the best deal they could on steel. However, and the company took that piece of steel and cut it into a lot of small parts. Well, the vendor was willing in this particular circumstance to actually make the small parts for us because they had the equipment to do it. But the purchasing department said, no, that's going to cost more. I just want the steel and we'll take care of cutting it into small parts. Once we did some further analysis, that piece of steel ended up getting cut into small parts and traveled about 10 miles before it was actually being used in the manufacturing process. So by the time we added up those associated costs of being moved around and handled, it was actually considerably more than what the vendor was willing to sell us the product for, with the value added activity that was beneficial to the organization. So because they were willing to actually deliver it to the right to the manufacturing location. So that type of analysis and understanding how all those interdependencies interplay and understanding what is value added activities, which is physically changing something, whether the cutting, welding, screwing, whatever the case is, versus non-value added activities, which is counting, moving, storing, holding an inventory, repositioning, don't add any value to the process itself. So either to further to go into an example is another company that I worked with, manufactured rifle scopes, the street market, outdoor sports market, and it took about 2.5 hours to manufacture. Or it's 2.5 hours is what the bill of materials added up for the production time to build this particular rifle scope. But the actual value added time was only about 10 minutes. The rest of it was being moved from one location to another. So as an organization looks to improve and learn about its processes, anything that can reduce the non-value added activities actually increases, adds value to their product, improves both the cycle time, but also the quality aspects, but also the cost structure of manufacturing their product. Other elements of understanding value streams is having really good understanding of manufacturing costs and cost accounting. I didn't know this until earlier that Angela was actually a cost accountant earlier in her career. I was actually a cost accountant in my career as well. And one of the things about cost accounting is that unlike normally, I would say normal accounting, but GAAP accounting, which is very structured on reporting financial information and doing it in a way that's consistent and follows all the accounting guides. Cost accounting actually has a lot of creativity to it, and also you get to learn and be involved with the individuals that are making the product and provide feedback so they can better understand how to develop the cost structure, what elements can be changed and adapted or adjusted in order to improve the cost of the product or reduce the cost or waste that's occurring. And so that's my plug now for cost accountants, is that they take a really critical role in the organization, but it's also a fun role that one can have in the organization. So if somebody's going through a graduate degree program, in a lot of the accounting classes are going to be working geared towards, that's what I described, GAAP accounting, compliance with reporting requirements and so forth. But there's opportunity within any graduate school program and finance programs to get into the cost accounting side of things. And really, if you're interested in how something's built and want to know, kind of like a big puzzle, it's like having a lot of not only challenging, but also allows for a lot of creativity. The other element that also in manufacturing, Angela made reference to it earlier, is that with financial analysis, a lot of manufacturers are making decisions that are going to be for 10, 15, or 20 years. We can build a new facility. Let's say it's a paper facility, it's a multi-million-dollar, or a fab plant for Intel, it's a multi-million-dollar expenditure. Yet there's a lot of analysis and assumptions to be made, but also understanding the cost structure and how that capital decisions being made and what are the variables and how it impact the outcomes, but also what are the risks that those outcomes are achieved, are all important elements to have a good understanding. And then another element that of manufacturing that is that we've heard a lot, and there's a lot of terminology around it, either lean manufacturing, continuous improvement, and that's back to one of the cultural needs, is that continuous learning, having a process where there are a number of tools out there. And there's the Coyote production system, which has been written about extensively. And there's other books and other companies that including like John Deere, it's all been written up about what they've done in terms of implementing continuous improvement processes and how it's benefited their organization. And then the last topic that I want to touch upon, which is kind of one of the elements of manufacturing, that is inventory in and of itself, how to manage it appropriately. It becomes a large investment by the company. It's how that inventory is managed also has a lot to do with what kind of company business model that company has. So if you're a company that builds to a back order, it's pretty easy to manage your inventory because you find what you need to build that order. But if you're building a product that's a consumer product, particularly discretionary consumer product, it gets to be much more complicated. So then you need some robust processes, learning, understanding your sales, forecasting, inventory planning, financial planning, how all those elements weave together in order to provide the right outcomes for the organization. And the one thing I will tell you about forecasting, you know, as soon as you put forecast together, it's not right. So then how do you have that feedback loop and make those very adjustments to it? Because you know, whatever you put down on that piece of paper, 2 days, 3 days later, it's going to change. It's going to be different. So then how do you build processes to be able to react to that in the time that you have them? And I think the one of the things that kind of was interesting is I was traveling in Europe for the last month, and when Charlie and I were talking about this, the cultural needs, the understanding the importance of quality, a lot of articles started coming out about one particular company. That company is Boeing, and Boeing has now has some real credibility issues within its manufacturing processes. So much so that unlike a lot of companies where they're selling to a very broad and diverse market and trying to make sure their products are competitive, Boeing actually sells to a very limited audience of customers. And those customers are finally saying at this point, what you're doing in terms of your quality systems, what you're doing in terms of your manufacturing processes is creating challenges for us, not only from a commercial standpoint, but then also from a regulatory standpoint. And so it's just kind of interesting as I was pull this topic together and seeing all of this come out in the news, and just kind of piecing it together where some of those flaws and weaknesses are within an organization and how they can have very real consequences and impacts, not only to that organization, but also to those customers as well. So that's kind of in a nutshell my topics in terms of those here focus areas that I feel that are clear that need to be addressed by the organization, continually worked on by that organization in terms of improving having an opportunity to be a successful manufacturer and also thrive in a changing economic environment.
And as we get ready for questions and so forth, Howard has an extensive background in both finance as well as senior leadership within the organization. So for those that are here that can ask questions, please do. We've got a tremendous resource. And I didn't realize you started on cost accounting either. So
Yeah, medical device manufacturing company.
yeah,
Loved it.
yeah. Mentioned Stryker. We used to build the subframes for Stryker for the roofing beds. So anyway, another cross path. My hope today is really one of kind of trying to take a look at what traditionally fits within an MBA program and what perhaps hasn't fit in an MBA program. As I look at my own education and my background and so forth, the MBA was a critical element of my long-term success of really broadening my tool base and understanding and getting deeper into key disciplines that have helped me over the years. I'll reiterate Howard's and probably many of Angela's comments as well, in that probably the most important course that I ended up taking from a leadership standpoint really dealt with organizational change and culture. And it's a more difficult process within a manufacturing environment because you tend to have a natural strata of two primary stratas, those that analyze, those that manage, those that take care of the accounting and oversight. And then you have what I'll call the doers, or the people that are actually physically touching the product as it's moving its way through the process and so forth. So managing the dynamic of those cultures is very, very critical. And it comes down to the fact at the end of the day, it's an acknowledgement that all boats rise and fall together. And I've seen many organizations where that's not been true of the leadership, is that they, in sometimes subtle ways and sometimes even purposeful ways, tend to try to stratify those more than they should be. And those are what I'll call also less successful organizations. Those that have been more successful have been those that have created environments that people feel as though they're a part. And many of the processes that Howard has just mentioned that actually require individuals in the organization from a cross-discipline strata to actually come together and to do the job of helping the process move along. But let me speak to a couple. I want to reiterate what Howard has mentioned as far as quality and continuous improvement. And it's really two different levels, and I think that's somewhat misunderstood. Again, I'm trying to come at this from a leadership standpoint within the organization, whether you're a manager, a CEO, or so forth. And by the way, in my comments, the business or organization size matters within this conversation, in that the smaller the organization, the greater the need for a generalized set of knowledge to be able to run that organization forward, which is a critically important concept, because as the organization grows, it's able to perhaps recruit in for the sophistication of higher levels of insight and so forth into some of these disciplines. But the first one is really quality, and that is that as a smaller organization, many years ago, we kept wondering why we needed to worry about this thing called ISO, International Organization of Standards and Practices. And we heard a lot about on the European side, and we had not heard so much on the North American side that several of our high-tech customers were starting to demand that we do this. We were a private company, a smaller private company. Well, then once we started to look at it and we investigated it, we took a step back and said, oh, another compliance issue. But then we took a look at why they had developed ISO in the first place. That it's a consistent set of standards across all organizations of similar types or varying types, with a consistent set of practices that helps an organization know whether that company has their stuff together at the end of the day. And so we jumped into the ISO ring, and it transformed the organization, transformed the way we thought about it and so forth. In a leadership position, you have to be able to understand those systems that reside and what you have to be compliant to. And it brings up the whole issue of compliance, is to say, I can either cross my arms and force a wall, or I can determine how that could actually be integrated into our organization and improve the environment in which we're participating. So quality is one area. The other one, which is the continuous improvement or lean. I love the manufacturing and have loved the manufacturing roles that I've served because it's tactile. I can talk to an engineer and we can work on concepts and so forth, and within days and sometimes hours, you walk out onto the production floor and it's happening right in front of you. And it allows that sensory feedback, and you can see a transformative process. And from a definitional standpoint, that also helped me when I'm talking to people, is to say, well, what is manufacturing? A lot of people think it's steel or it's Intel. Manufacturing is the transformation of any raw material into a higher value state, period. That means it's incredibly all-encompassing. It also means, getting back to Howard's comment on the cost accounting, it's an incredibly creative process as well, which I think draws particular aptitudes and so forth into the manufacturing field and so forth. It's critically important in the area of continuous improvement, in that you need to integrate that sense that nothing is ever the way it should be forever. You're always trying to press yourself forward. In our company many years ago, we had a manufacturing organization working with precision sheet metal. And one of our mantras was, if it ain't broke, break it. And so we would actually try to push ourselves through those areas and integrate that. The other element is supplier management, supply-based management, and procurement, which is actually two kind of separate disciplines. One is really finding the resource that complements your organization, either in raw materials or contract operations, which are adding value to items that you may not be able to produce yourself or will augment your own processes and so forth. The world is much smaller in regard to the availability of resources. And even though we're working with the breadth of economy, let's say in Oregon, it's unlikely that many companies will be able to find the services that they need to really complement their manufacturing process, which means then they need to have an active program of search, qualification, contractual elements, and so forth. I mean, when you take a look at supply-based management, it's inspection, it's process, it's verification, it's test, it's approval. In many cases, it's also very, very contractual oriented to be able to be clear about expectations, outcomes, deliverables, scope, and so forth, which means having a legal background, which an MBA program oftentimes will give, but with special emphasis on contractual pieces, highly critical skill base. The other is the procurement side, which is the how, which also ties into forecasting, which also ties into the pricing, which also ties into how you're hitting the marketplace with the product. And so those two elements are things that I've not typically seen within an MBA program. And if people can acquire those skills, oftentimes going out with a either undergraduate or MBA, you may not have that specialty, in which case the company is going to be able to train you in their processes. If you're looking for something that is going to garner you perhaps a broader perspective over time, you'd want to garner the same skills from somebody who perhaps is independent of a particular organization, only because they'll talk about things that are applicable to a breadth of experiences rather than a single. One that's come up, which is much more difficult to deal with anymore, is logistics. And so the logistics field is very complex anymore on an international as well as the domestic side. Our logistics subsystems in the United States are highly stressed and getting more so. Rail is being overtaxed. We just saw the implication of a ship hitting a bridge truss in Baltimore, and the hundreds, not thousands, of containers that were on that ship at this point, and just the implication of that on the supply chain and so forth are monumental, and thus really plays into it. So again, from an oversight standpoint, a manufacturer oftentimes is going to have to move their thing to some different location, either to a warehouse, to a customer, and that logistics system that's going to be planned out there is an area of expertise that's critically important to understand as you try to face the marketplace in front. Not certainly finally, but another critical element is technology. Where do you use technology and where do you not use technology? And that can relate to digital technology, software systems, and so forth. Or again, the capital investment of equipment and machinery that plays a part in that transformative process. I've seen particular companies that have amplified the use of technology in their organization and created monoliths within their organization that as soon as that machine goes down, the entire system stops. Thus, it gets back to this area of continuous improvement and value stream mapping that I've seen other organizations that have machines that literally slide in, do something, slide out, slide in another machine. And those are much less costly, but they provide much greater fluidity. And it gets back to this what seems to be a simple concept of value stream mapping, which actually ends up being highly complex in its integration into the organization and implementation on an ongoing basis. And it also applies to, again, the technical, the digital pieces that are used in the organization. Finally, I'll just reiterate what Howard has talked about is lean manufacturing. There's a lot written on it for people that have not exposed themselves and have not studied the general concepts of lean manufacturing or lean process or value stream mapping in an organization. I couldn't more highly recommend a path of study to simply open your eyes to how do I transform a process to make it more efficient, more effective, which at the end of the day, is what it's all about. Manufacturing. So, any questions? I will actually just open the floor for a second, and Natalie from Echo Northwest, who does a lot of the background study and so forth.
Excuse me, sorry.
Bless you.
Probably really loud on that
Yeah.
microphone.
Is there anything that you would like to add in regard to Oregon's economy and manufacturing and so forth that you would?
I would just like to talk about for a second, the preservation of our comparative advantage in manufacturing. And I want to get your guys' thoughts on this, because we talk about this a lot at Echo, we talk about it with OBI, we talk about it in lots of different policy spaces on how, especially with the upcoming CHIPS dollars, right? How do we make Oregon eligible for those dollars and make Oregon the spot where those dollars want to be? And so oftentimes when I talk to Bob, he always says, of course, in economics, we have answers for why companies locate where, right? But oftentimes those are not the same reasons why companies are actually locating in certain places. So I would love your perspective on why you think Oregon is so special in manufacturing and how do we preserve that?
I'm gonna take a quick shot. I think it depends on who you're talking about. So if by chance we're talking about, let's say, the chip industry, power. You know, it's almost at the very top because there is so much power, and natural resource water is another one, which is done that. But the other side that I've seen repeatedly is talent pool. Why do you see a McDonald's and a Burger King on opposite corners from a baseline level? We study about this in MBA and so forth, because they actually, at the end of the day, complement the customer experiences to choice. So give them a choice of what they do, but that talent is a critical piece that at least I've seen for years. So it would be dependent upon kind of what you're searching for. Would a steel mill, for instance, want to locate themselves, let's say, in the Oregon economy and so forth? I'm so sure that we have the infrastructure from either raw materials or other. We might have great power, but we don't have something to underground. So it's balanced.
Yeah, it's too expensive to ship it across the US from here.
Sure.
No, we see, I mean, I agree, it's specifically on power, it's affordable, reliable power. So when you get at the question of how do we preserve our competitive advantage, preserving affordable and reliable power is a big piece of that. And this is a hard conversation in many ways, because power generation transmission is complicated. There are climate issues involved. To make a lot of things, it often requires high heat processes, which right now, I mean, people are working on these technologies every day. But right now, natural gas is the way to get a high heat process going. And so in environments where natural gas is under threat, so to speak, for now anyway, that eliminates certain technologies from operating, period, or thinking about investing. So affordable, reliable power. Water is a big one, especially when you're talking about some of those high heat processes, but also technology-based manufacturing. The other thing that people should not lose track of, I think, in Oregon, when we talk about the competitive landscape is Oregon's boundaries are arbitrary political boundaries established at some point in history when the state was created. They are not economic boundaries. companies. And so we inherently every day as a state are competing with neighboring states or distant states as solutions like transportation, technology allow for a more diffuse operation across the country or the globe. Our competitive landscape shifts, and so we have to be mindful that as we take the state forward through policy, that we are not becoming such an outlier that it doesn't make sense for a company to invest or grow here. There are certainly reasons for companies to invest elsewhere. You know, if somebody sells ice cream nationally, making all of the ice cream on the West Coast doesn't make sense when you get into volume, supply chain, et cetera, et cetera. So it makes sense then that a company like Tillamook would look to the Midwest for expansion and investment. But we cannot let those rational business reasons sort of cover up some of the other policy decisions that get made in the economic environment here. But people don't know Oregon's story, history of, I mean, it's actually fascinating to dive into the history of how we became a big, ship manufacturing and some of the things because of our proximity with the river, the port, Pacific Rim location. We have a lot of natural advantages and we're a place people like to live. So we gotta make sure in the effort of progress, we're not eroding those very advantages. So that's my policy driven take.
I think the other comment, I agree with all of that. Another comment is that sometimes you get a cluster started, it will feed upon itself. And so whether it be like the athletic footwear, you got Nike, you got Adidas, you got other companies that are feeding off that. Same way with what Andrew was talking about with shipping, transportation, that whole segment just kind of built and fed off each other. And there were some comparative advantages. Time, Oregon steel was still in this area. It led to feeding the shipping industry, and no one had industry through World War II, and so it just kind of built that nucleus, not only the various resources that are needed, but also the skill set of the labor force that was able to then build on it.
We didn't answer your question about the CHIPS Act, so I do want to give the legislature credit for the steps it took in 2023 at the urging of business community to pass state level legislation and incentives to leverage the federal CHIPS Act opportunity. Now we are on the record saying it's not quite enough. And it's too industry specific. If those incentives work for one industry, we ought to be exploring them for other industries as well. And think about investment in industry as a return on investment opportunity for the state. But between the tax credit, some of the targeted land use components and the other incentive programs that were in the package passed by the legislature, we are already seeing the benefit of the federal CHIPS Act money. We have less than 2% of the country's population. We have 15% of the semiconductor jobs in the country right now. That will change because other states are coming for it. So our share will probably decline in relative terms, but we'll grow it for sure with billions of dollars in investment.
By the way, on a subside of the chips, I just read a book called Chip Wars, which if anybody has not read it, please do. But one of the things that they're talking about is that to put us more, the United States in a more competitive worldwide scope, we've got to up our game. And the big target of that, quite frankly, is our local producer. However, one of the key technologies is a stereolithography piece of equipment, capital investment that we talked about earlier. That's $100 billion per piece, which is staggering when you're thinking about the kind of capital investment. How would you like to be the cost accountant? Great question. Thank you.
Thank you for your one.
Julie, do you have any questions?
I thought I need to think on it a little bit more. I don't have one in mind.
Okay. Well, coming from the higher education business, we're trying to think of ways that we can integrate this very important sector of the Oregon economy into our programming. There's some challenges to doing that because our MBA program prides itself in sort of being a generic cross-sectoral program. We're known for that. At the same time, it's important that any MBA program be responsive to the particular industrial characteristics of the region it serves. And our program, by and large, is training people that go out into jobs in the region, whether it's the greater Salem area, greater Portland, Seattle. I mean, that's really where the lion's share of our graduates go. And we know that this is the most important industry in the state in terms of proportion of GDP. Some thoughts that each of you have, especially being alums of Atkinson. Angela, you're a joint MBA JD grad, came out of the joint program, and Howard and Charlie, both of you came out of what was the Master of Management program, but then morphed into becoming an MBA. So knowing us and knowing Willamette, what suggestions do you have for the kinds of programming that we can build into our portfolio that is well suited for students that really want to go into manufacturing in a serious way, whether it's through leadership, whether it's through specific areas of specialization within the manufacturing sector, whether it's supply chain management, whether it's operations management, not just the C-suite, not just management, but they have particular interests and specializations that would take them into various niches in the manufacturing company or the manufacturing industry. So, programming suggestions, thoughts.
Well, I have a couple, I think. One of the challenges is that manufacturing, it's a very broad topic because it can cover a big gamut from in terms of what's being manufactured. I know one thing from my standpoint that helped me was just getting exposed to different manufacturers. Where for my career interest did I want to put my time and effort to develop more? Because if I was working for a discretionary consumer product company, that's going to be kind of a different skill set than if I'm working for a company that's doing essentially heavy manufacturing, built to a backlog, which you build up that order book, and so it was for me. And then I got exposed to manufacturing from a timber product standpoint, and internships to warehouse work. And I think from that standpoint, it kind of gave me a perspective where I wanted to kind of then start to focus my interest. So I think partly what the program could give people, there's ways to get the students who are interested to kind of find out what is out of that large field that's available, or the opportunities that are available. Where does one want to kind of focus their attention? And that can help guide them in terms of some of the further education or further programs that you engage involved in. At least from my perspective, looking back on it. All those experiences that I had were very valuable, but and there's a lot of things that are now, which you learn in one segment can be moved into another segment. So when you're starting, probably the biggest challenge for me was moving to a company that did build to order, moving to a consumer products company where forecasting and the challenge around that forecasting and having that correction feedback in order to change that forecast and adapt. That took a little bit of time to adjust to, but again, it can be done.
Yeah, a couple things. I mean, I didn't plan to go into a manufacturing company when I got out of undergrad, but did and loved it. Was immediately sort of hooked. And I think part of that was people don't think about manufacturing unless they're in manufacturing. Obviously, someone built the rail car that I'm seeing on the tracks, and obviously someone built the widget I'm using today, but you kind of take it for granted, as a consumer. And I think, Marion County has a really robust and diverse manufacturing economy. All of those sectors I mentioned have, things, so I don't know if there's an internship program, that could be developed in partnership with some of those companies, where students can get Howard's point, hands-on experience. They may decide they don't like that industry at all, but I guarantee you what most students will learn and be surprised about is that intersectionality of disciplines and the creativity. Even with the things we might stereotypically think of as old school manufacturing, because they've been going on for a long time. But these are the most creative, innovative environments ever. And so if that kind of dynamism interests you, just getting into any type of manufacturer for an experiential, the experiential learning piece is a big part of the Atkinson program. And I think if you could weave some manufacturing into that, it would be great. I also just lost my train of thought, so there's that too. Yeah, so I think that experiential learning piece, and I think what I was going at too is there's manufacturing. We talk about manufacturing from a policy standpoint often because there is not a single business story you can't tell through the lens of a manufacturer, whether it's accounting and finance, or whether it's construction, whether it's transportation, trade, management, HR, workforce development, procurement, logistics, technology, anything. It's gonna happen in a manufacturing sector. So I think if people don't know really what they want their specialty to be coming out of Atkinson, because it is more of a generalist program. Being in a manufacturing company for a little while also can help you realize like, oh, if I go into finance, I'm not pigeonholed. If I go into marketing, I still need to know finance. So I think from an educational standpoint, it's one of the best hands-on ways to demonstrate why a general program in knowledge and all of this is important. Last thing I'll say is we do an annual bus tour. We actually wrap a giant bus with these ridiculous graphics and we drive it around the state to highlight and promote the manufacturing and innovation sector. And so we would welcome any students who want to join us in the bus, October 7 through 9. We'll make sure you have info, but it's pretty fun, and we do 3 to 5 manufacturing tours a day over the 3 days to get a cross section of industries and experiences. So it's not that I support missing class, but class on the bus.
Right. The piece I would add is that I think there are elements that we talked about today that could actually be integrated into some of the curriculum that's already going on in the MBA that will be cross-sectional. Let's take value stream mapping. It's used in the healthcare field, it's used in government, it's used in manufacturing. I think its roots were clearly in the kind of the manufacturing side and so forth, but it also is connected into cost accounting in a very unique way. And quite frankly, the whole lean, quote unquote, lean accounting piece has kind of transformed a lot of manufacturing companies and how they look at it and so forth. Elements of quality, quality in an organization, whether it's quality of the process, if everybody considers themselves a supplier and a customer in an organization, and what they hand off to the next piece is a representative of them, that's a quality relationship. And so I think with some creativity, there are ways that could purposely embed these within the organization or the academic experience as a first step process, perhaps, moving on from there.
Right, yeah. Well, when the market demand is strong enough and looks to be really sustainable long term, you do see specialty degrees that are offered by business and management schools. For example, healthcare MBAs. We're actually looking at the possibility of some kind of healthcare focused MBA. It could be our MBA with pretty significant healthcare consideration, or it could be something that is a deeper dive, not going all the way to being a master's in healthcare management, which has to be accredited by another organization and so forth. But the ways we're looking at cutting into helping people get a leg up to go into manufacturing would be a micro credential through the Executive Development Center, our continuing education unit, where we would offer kind of a crash course for people that want to go into manufacturing leadership careers. They may have the MBA and they do this to kind of get an extra credential, or it could be people that are not necessarily in the MBA program that will come in and do the certificate. So that would be one way of doing it. The other would be we would design some courses that are specific to the manufacturing industry, 2, 3, 4 courses, and then create a concentration, which could be a certificate. And could also be matriculated on a standalone basis. The person wouldn't need to be in the MBA program. They could come in off the street, do the certificate, and then apply the credits if they wanted to the MBA. Obviously, experiential learning is a great vehicle for getting people connected with manufacturing. Most, if not nearly all of our graduate students do internships. The only ones that are required to are the 3 twos. BA, MBA. Everyone else doesn't have to, but most end up doing an internship anyway. The other thing that we're looking at doing is if we have an employer like Nike or Columbia Sportswear or Intel, whoever, that has enough employees on site that want to do an MBA with us, let's say 20, 25, 30 of them, we will come to them and deliver the content. We'll provide the MBA in-house, and we can customize some customizable components of the MBA to fit that company's needs, fit that industry needs. And it would be through our preferred partner model, where preferred partners are organizations that send us employees. Everybody gets a scholarship. There's some perks coming to the employer, free use of our facilities, and so on. So those are the kinds of things that we're thinking about. But if we're in an area where manufacturing is very significant and a large portion of our students are people in that industry, I can imagine, especially the MBA in manufacturing. It's out there waiting to be designed.
Yeah, and I think it's been interesting in my at least tenure in Oregon's business and so forth. Again, because we are a small business state, if you ask the normal manufacturer, the manufacturer that's got 50 some odd employees, do you need an MBA? They're gonna say, are you crazy?
Yeah.
But the fact of the matter is, about 80% of them do.
Yeah.
They need somebody who actually has that skill set to be able to help drive their organization forward.
Right.
And so it's a little bit more of a hard sell, I think, within that industry than perhaps what we've seen in some other sectors, according to what I've seen.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think, no, I agree with that. The other is, this is kind of the wrong way, but a lot of the MBA programs, everybody's gonna be out there to be like CEO or a CFO or whatever the case. But to be successful in manufacturing, that's where the cost accounting, from my standpoint, starting there, you gotta start getting your hands dirty and then work your way up in the organization. I mean, I've been CFO of companies and so forth, but if I didn't have that understanding involved and integrated into the process and how the accounting tied in and how it impacted or helped with risk organization and understanding the business processes and the engineering processes. And what's a bill of materials? How does that play a critical role? I mean, that could be either overwhelming or interesting and fascinating to see how this kind of fits together. It just depends, but if you don't get exposed to it, you're not going to be able to be a C-suite person if you don't have that understanding.
Right. It's not, an MBA is not a fast track to the C-suite. Dispel that notion, particularly in some of our younger students.
Right. But, and I use the, back to the Boeing example, because I've been reading it for a reason, probably more closely than others, but one of the complaints or one of the big observations is that the executive management didn't have engineering backgrounds. They were all primarily coming out of GE with financial backgrounds and didn't really have that connection with. Now, granted, there were other issues beyond just where the executive management was, but in terms of just having that understanding background, it makes a big difference. What is the bill of materials, what is those quality processes? You can't dictate a quality process, you have to have it, the individual doing the work has to be quality. You can provide structure that allows them to foster and become integral to the process, but you can't, like, you can't just push it down from the top. I mean, I've seen it, and it doesn't work. It's when the person doing the work's got to own it, it's got to be nurtured, supported by.
Well, not to speak against Howard of having a career in finance and me having a finance undergraduate degree. I often said earlier in my career, and I still somewhat believe in this, is that the people that will kill the organization fastest are the finance guys that come down and say, you know, you got to make it go cheaper, you got to make it better, and they just don't understand the process of getting there.
They're not trained.
They're not trained.
Trained to understand or appreciate it.
And I think your last word, appreciated, is particularly relevant.
Yeah, I'll tell one, get back to appreciated, where it's Charlie's right, that's killed a lot of things. But back in my railcar manufacturing, there was a brake press that it took the operator about 8 hours to change it over. And he came to so I was heavily involved in the manufacturing. And yet, this person, I was kind of more heavily involved in it. I probably should have, but nobody stopped me, so I just continued to do it. Anyhow, the operator said, for $30,000, I can change the setup time of the brake press from 8 hours to less than 4 hours, about 2. I think he said I needed get about 2.5 hours. And since I was the finance person, CFO of that operation, this $30,000 expenditure right then and there. And boy, did that did 2 things. One, it did save a certain amount of time. That operator told everybody else. And all of these different initiatives that people had in the back of their mind that never got anywhere, we started to bubble up. And the expenditures were not, when they're all told up, weren't that massive. The impact of the organization is created a culture, created a culture change.
Julie, looked like you had a question.
Well, some of the comments I have is just kind of, acknowledging that I agree with some of the answers that were given, but though I didn't get my master's at your organization, I remember going through, doing case studies. Not one of my case studies was manufacturing. How do you change the cost structure of an organization? That's much more complicated than whether or not you should theoretically take on a loan or theoretically do an M&A, right? It is much more complicated of a case study, I guess, to kind of say, the demand of the world has changed. We have these tariffs between the US and China that suddenly the cost of the materials is increasing 25%. Should you manufacture somewhere else, right? Those kind of case studies never in one of my courses. So I think that there's just in like general classes that you have in an MD program, there's a way to fold in exposure to manufacturing too, because I would have never have thought that I would have ended up in a manufacturing company. In fact, I followed one of my bosses over to the manufacturing company. That's the only reason I got there. But in a non-manufacturing environment, so I worked for a software company for a long period of time. All the finance personnel were just clamoring and fighting to kind of like get a project that was interesting to do. It wasn't just kind of like, oh, then close the next month, close the next month. I want a project, right? In manufacturing, everything is so complex that the staff that works with me, if they say I want a project, okay, I have 50, I list 50 wrong. Which one do you want to do, right? So I think that if people like understood that the work environment, because of the complex nature of it, just lends itself to be more, even if it's not as like, it's not Nike, it's not, it's not like these big name things, but you go in and it's just interesting, right? There's, so I think that if during the coursework there was exposure to that, You know, I was in cost accounting as well for a while. And I'll tell you, like, it is really, really difficult for us to get good cost accountants, good finance operations. I have a rec now, finance, senior manager, finance operations. Just, you know, so there's opportunity out there for people. And I just don't think people really necessarily know what an opportunity it is compared to other things that other companies that maybe have, you know, a little more razzle dazzle in the, oh, we're big in healthcare, so that's where you need to go, or whatever. I just don't think people realize how big we are in manufacturing.
I would love to comment on that from like a workforce talent pool standpoint. I mean, we have that issue at every single level of the manufacturer, right? On the floor as well as all the way up to the top. And I mean, there are some great folks in Hillsborough that are doing apprenticeship programs, but like, we need recognition of the manufacturing sector at the start, right? Like kids in high school are exposed to, oh, I could be a CEO, or, oh, I could be a fireman or something like that, but manufacturing in general is ignored, as you said, right? Like, you don't think about how this chair was created or why it's here, or, you know, where it came from. So yeah, I just want to add that, like, at any level of a manufacturing firm, that needs to happen.
Well, Angela, I know you have a 1:30 commitment, and actually the sign of a really good panelist when we run overtime.
Well, we caught that from the audience, that's outstanding, so.
Well, yes, well, thank you. Really good audience and a good panel, but I want to thank all three of you, Angela, Howard, and Charlie, for taking the time to come and share your insights. Really, really appreciate it. Great cross-section of people from the sector. Angela, you're from, essentially, is it okay to describe Oregon Business Industry as a trade organization?
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah,
Okay.
we're a business advocacy.
Business advocacy
Yeah.
organization, and then two kind of veterans from the manufacturing sector itself that have been there, done that, and are, in Howard's case, still doing it as corporate treasurer at VetSource, and of course, Charlie, your long leadership career, most recently at Judith Cameron. So, and I want to thank, you know, Natalie and Julie for coming. And as I said, this is recorded, so we will absolutely make it available. So this group won't be the only group that is gleaning from your insights. So thanks all.
Thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
Okay.